White House, where U.S. President Donald Trump has signed tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico and...
We start in the U.S., where President Donald Trump is sending 1,500 troops to the Mexican border to boost security.
Vast amounts of fentanyl have poured into our country from Mexico. And as you know, also...
U.S. President Donald Trump is delaying tariffs on imports from Mexico for a month. Its President Claudia Sheinbaum says. She spoke to Trump on the phone earlier today.
It's more than just trade disputes. What's happening now between the U.S. and Mexico could be described as a modern economic Cold War. It's a conflict that has quickly moved beyond tariffs and immigration control. The issues are deep-rooted and multifaceted, touching sectors that are critical to both countries. The stakes are high. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has warned that Mexico will not submit to any impositions that threaten its sovereignty. Her bold stance has been widely perceived as a rejection of American dominance in the region, signaling that Mexico is no longer willing to follow U.S. directives without challenging them. As tensions rise, one thing is clear. Mexico has made it known that it will stand firm, even if it means escalating this dispute. The fight may not yet be a full-scale trade war, but both countries are taking positions that could lead to a much larger conflict. Mexico's independent stance is shaking the foundations of U.S. influence in the region. On the other side, the U.S. is scrambling to respond. President Donald Trump, in an attempt to assert control, has already sent 1,500 troops to the Mexican border. His goal? To tighten security and combat the increasing flow of illegal migration and drug trafficking into the U.S. from Mexico. Trump's hardline stance against Mexico isn't new. Over the years, his administration has frequently clashed with its southern neighbor on a wide range of issues, but the recent decisions made by both parties have turned the conflict into something more dangerous, an all-out diplomatic showdown. This goes beyond just migration and crime. Mexico's economic retaliation has the potential to inflict significant harm on critical U.S. industries. It's clear that this isn't just about security or border control anymore. This has become a high-stakes game where both sides are fighting to maintain their influence, and Mexico has shown it will not back down easily. Mexico is not backing down. In fact, it's leveraging its position in the global supply chain to drive home its point. While the U.S. may have long been the economic powerhouse, Mexico's role in key sectors is undeniable. For instance, Mexico exports nearly 80% of its goods to the U.S., and in 2024, trade between the two countries surpassed $800 billion. Yet, Mexico holds power over several sectors that the U.S. cannot afford to ignore. Automotive, agriculture, and oil. These are the sectors where Mexico has the strongest leverage. If Mexico chooses to slow down or even halt the supply of critical components for U.S. manufacturers, it could bring the American automotive industry to its knees. Companies like Ford, GM, and Chrysler rely on Mexican-made parts for their vehicles. A disruption to this supply chain would mean costly delays and losses. The automotive sector is especially vulnerable. The U.S. depends on Mexico for automotive parts, and an interruption in this supply could impact production across the nation. The economic consequences would ripple through the entire U.S. economy. Automakers, retailers, and consumers would feel the squeeze if Mexico decides to impose tariffs or export restrictions. Agriculture is another arena where Mexico holds powerful cards. From California to Texas, the U.S. agricultural industry is heavily dependent on Mexican exports. Whether it's fruits, vegetables, or meat products, the U.S. imports massive quantities from its southern neighbor. What would happen if Mexico decides to impose tariffs or export restrictions on these goods? The price of food in the U.S. could skyrocket. Imagine paying more for fruits and vegetables, or even seeing empty shelves in grocery stores. The impact on U.S. consumers would be immediate, and the political ramifications could be profound. But there's more. Mexico could also target migrant labor, which is a critical workforce in U.S. agriculture. Many seasonal workers cross into the U.S. from Mexico to work the fields. If Mexico were to tighten border controls or even halt the flow of labor, the U.S. agricultural sector could face a severe labor shortage, making it harder for farms to operate. This issue of migrant labor has been a sore spot between the two countries for years. As much as the U.S. may want to restrict immigration, it's reliant on that very flow of labor to keep its agricultural economy running. Without it, the consequences would be disastrous, particularly for states like California and Texas, which rely heavily on migrant workers for their agriculture. It's not just about food and cars. The energy sector is where Mexico's influence could really shake things up. While the U.S. has its own oil reserves, it is heavily reliant on Mexican crude oil for its refineries. In particular, U.S. refineries depend on heavy crude oil from Mexico, and without it, the U.S. could face a supply shortage. What if Mexico decides to reduce or even stop this flow of oil? The U.S. energy market could experience a significant supply gap, which would likely push gasoline prices higher. This wouldn't just hurt businesses, but also the everyday American consumer. Imagine the effect on voters' anger as fuel costs rise and prices surge across the economy. Mexico has long been known for its policy of nationalizing its oil resources, and if President Sheinbaum's government chooses to prioritize domestic consumption, the U.S. could find itself at the mercy of Mexico's oil exports. This would have major implications for the U.S. economy, especially in regions dependent on affordable energy prices. Another powerful weapon Mexico holds is geography. The U.S. and Mexico share a vast border through which millions of dollars worth of goods flow every single day. If Mexico decides to tighten trade at the border, the U.S. logistics and retail sectors could be severely impacted. Long waits at the border could delay shipments of everything from car parts to groceries, potentially bringing the U.S. economy to a halt. In the worst-case scenario, supermarkets could face empty shelves, and businesses reliant on smooth border operations could find themselves in a nightmarish situation. The U.S. economy could grind to a halt as border delays disrupt supply chains and logistics. Even if Mexico doesn't stop trade altogether, a gradual slowdown in the flow of goods could lead to significant bottlenecks at the border. And in today's global economy, timely delivery of goods is everything. Any disruption, no matter how small, could lead to serious economic consequences, especially in industries like automotive, retail, and manufacturing. Perhaps the most politically charged issue between the U.S. and Mexico is migration. For years, Mexico has acted as a buffer zone, preventing migrants from Central America from reaching the U.S. border. But President Sheinbaum has now made it clear that Mexico will no longer shoulder this responsibility. If Mexico decides to open the gates, the U.S. could be hit by a mass migration crisis. Tens of thousands of refugees from Central and South America could flood into the U.S. This would not only create a humanitarian crisis, but also a political one, as Trump's immigration policies would be immediately tested. The idea of a migrant wave arriving at the U.S. border would undoubtedly trigger outrage in America. Trump has spent years pushing for border security, and if Mexico backs off from its role in controlling migration, the situation could become untenable for the U.S. government. The tension between these two leaders is escalating quickly. President Sheinbaum's actions are challenging Trump's authority in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. From trade policy to migration, Mexico is asserting its sovereignty and national interests, and it's doing so at a time when Trump's political future could be at stake. The political ramifications of this conflict are huge. Trump could face significant backlash from voters in border states like Texas and Arizona, where the economy is tightly connected to Mexico. Trump's supporters are already calling for tougher measures against Mexico, but Sheinbaum's firm stance may ultimately create a political crisis for the Trump administration. So, what comes next? The economic, diplomatic, and political pressures between the U.S. and Mexico are only going to escalate in the coming months. Mexico has strategically positioned itself as a major force in this confrontation, and it's not backing down. The question now is, how will Trump respond? Will he escalate the trade war, impose more sanctions, or attempt to rebuild relations with Mexico? On the other hand, Sheinbaum's government might continue to harden its policies and push back even more. One thing is certain, this tug of war between the two countries could reshape the future of North America, with both sides unwilling to back down. It's a new era in U.S.-Mexico relations, one that could last for years. As the diplomatic and economic tensions between the U.S. and Mexico continue to escalate, Mexico is diversifying its energy strategies while facing complex water disputes. Mexico's state-run oil company, Pemex, has been under increasing pressure due to the U.S.'s tariffs and trade policies. In an effort to mitigate the risks of relying too heavily on the U.S. market, Pemex has begun seeking new opportunities in global markets, positioning itself to reduce dependence on its northern neighbor. The recent threats of U.S. tariffs have forced Pemex to reimagine its business strategy, with a clear shift toward diversifying its export channels to Asia and Europe. By looking beyond the U.S. for new energy markets, Pemex is attempting to cushion itself from the adverse effects of potential trade barriers, signaling that Mexico's energy sector is ready to take a more independent path. This move could have significant implications for the U.S., as Mexico's oil exports are crucial to U.S. refineries, particularly those on the Gulf Coast. A reduction in these exports or a shift to other markets could lead to a disruption of U.S. energy supply, forcing U.S. companies to seek alternative sources of crude oil at a time when global demand is volatile. Mexico's energy diversification plans could disrupt U.S. energy markets, leading to increased costs and supply chain instability for the U.S. In addition to the energy sector, the U.S.-Mexico relationship has also been tested by a water dispute over the Colorado River. Mexico has requested a special delivery channel for water from the river to alleviate shortages in the border city of Tijuana. However, the U.S. has denied this request, citing concerns about water scarcity and the impact on American agriculture, particularly for farmers in the Rio Grande Valley, who depend on the river's water for irrigation. Under the 1944 Water Sharing Treaty, Mexico is obligated to share water from the Colorado River with the U.S. But tensions have flared in recent years over Mexico's failure to meet delivery commitments. This shortfall is particularly problematic for American farmers, who are seeing their crops suffer due to insufficient water. In light of these growing pressures, Mexico's denial of water delivery requests has exacerbated the situation, further straining an already delicate relationship between the two countries. This issue has reached a boiling point, with President Sheinbaum vowing to address it through diplomatic channels. The potential fallout from the water dispute could further complicate the already tense situation at the border, particularly as both nations are wrestling with significant environmental challenges. The U.S. refusal to grant Mexico's request is seen as a political move to protect its agricultural interests, yet it also signals deeper long-term issues that could shape the future of U.S.-Mexico relations. The water dispute over the Colorado River underscores the broader tensions between the two nations, with environmental resources becoming a new battleground. These developments mark just another chapter in a growing divide between the U.S. and Mexico, with energy and water resources now at the heart of the conflict. As Mexico continues to assert its sovereignty over critical sectors like energy and water, the U.S. finds itself struggling to adapt to a reality where its economic dominance is being challenged by a neighbor that is no longer willing to be a passive partner. Mexico's strategic diversification of energy markets and its determined stance on water rights not only threaten the U.S. agricultural and energy sectors, but also underscore a wider geopolitical shift in North America. With both countries facing difficult economic and environmental pressures, the next few years could see even deeper conflicts as these key issues unfold. The question now is how the U.S. will respond. Will it double down on its existing policies, or will it find ways to address Mexico's grievances? Only time will tell whether these emerging disputes will escalate into a full-blown geopolitical crisis, or if diplomatic efforts will bring about a resolution. One thing is certain: the relationship between these two nations is being reshaped in real time, with consequences that could echo for decades to come. The U.S. could be hit by a mass migration crisis. Tens of thousands of refugees from Central and South America could flood into the U.S. This would not only create a humanitarian crisis, but also a political one, as Trump's immigration policies would be immediately tested. The idea of a migrant wave arriving at the U.S. border would undoubtedly trigger outrage in America. Trump has spent years pushing for border security, and if Mexico backs off from its role in controlling migration, the situation could become untenable for the U.S. government. The tension between these two leaders is escalating quickly. President Sheinbaum's actions are challenging Trump's authority in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. From trade policy to migration, Mexico is asserting its sovereignty and national interests. And it's doing so at a...
Min reaktion på det amerikanske besøg er flere ting. Så kan det her ikke ses uafhængigt af de udsagn og de meldinger, vi har hørt fra amerikansk side.
After weeks of speculation that he wants to take over Greenland, President Trump is doubling down on his suggestion that the U.S. will play a larger role in the island's future.
I think, well, not provocation. This is friendliness, not provocation. We're dealing with a lot of people from Greenland that would like to see something happen.
On March 13th, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump made a bold declaration during a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Trump reaffirmed his ambition to take control of Greenland, a strategically located island rich in natural resources and pivotal for global security, particularly in the Arctic. Trump famously said, "We need it, and it will happen." But his words quickly sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. Denmark, which governs Greenland, responded almost immediately, with Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen firmly stating, "Greenland is not for sale. It is part of Denmark, and that's final." This was no ordinary political rhetoric. Denmark's swift, unwavering rejection of Trump's ambitions was a direct challenge to U.S. interests. What followed was a show of unity by the European Union and NATO, both of which backed Denmark's position. Europe sent a loud and clear message. No part of EU territory is up for negotiation. This marked a significant turning point in U.S.-European relations, demonstrating Europe's resolve to defend its sovereignty. It wasn't just about Greenland. It was about setting boundaries for the U.S. on the global stage. While Trump was igniting a political firestorm over Greenland, a far more personal crisis was unfolding within the tech and automotive world. Tesla, the company that was once hailed as the pioneer of electric vehicles, EVs, faced a massive crisis in Europe. At the start of 2025, Tesla's sales plummeted by 45% in Europe, a staggering drop that has sent shockwaves through the auto industry. The company's struggles aren't just about poor sales figures, they are the result of years of corporate missteps. European pension funds, some of the largest institutional investors, began pulling out of Tesla entirely. Denmark's two largest pension funds, Pension Denmark and Academic Pension, divested from Tesla, citing concerns over labor rights, corporate governance, and the toxic influence of Elon Musk's political affiliations. These pension funds weren't just shedding stock, they were making a public statement about the ethical concerns surrounding Tesla's leadership. The company's refusal to sign labor agreements with Swedish workers in 2023 led to widespread strikes in the region, and the Nordic countries, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, joined in, imposing blockades on Tesla shipments. This sparked a massive backlash across Europe, a region where labor rights are considered a core value. Tesla's failure to respect labor laws was perceived as a direct affront to European values. In particular, Tesla's anti-union stance led to escalating tensions, with unions organizing protests and refusing to handle Tesla shipments. These disruptions were not just an inconvenience, they were a major blow to Tesla's operations in Europe, resulting in a halt in service centers and a paralyzed supply chain. By the end of 2024, it was clear that Tesla's brand had taken a severe hit in Europe. According to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ACEA, Tesla's European sales dropped by 45% in January 2025, compared to a much smaller overall market decline. And the loss wasn't just in sales, it was in consumer trust. A survey in the UK revealed that nearly 59% of electric vehicle buyers refused to purchase a Tesla, not because of the vehicle's performance, but because they didn't want to be associated with Elon Musk's political stance. Musk's increasingly controversial support for far-right movements, such as his backing of the Alternative for Germany, AfD party, criticizing the UK government, and aligning with Italy's nationalist Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, alienated a significant portion of European consumers. In countries like Germany, Tesla's market share was rapidly shrinking. By early 2025, Tesla's sales in Germany plunged by 76% in just 2 months. Meanwhile, the entire EV market in Germany grew by 30%, with Volkswagen, Renault, and Chinese EV brands gaining significant ground. One European Union official summed it up. Musk was once a green tech icon. Now he's an opponent of European values. Tesla's fall from grace is a direct consequence of its failure to align with European values, especially regarding labor rights and environmental policies. The irony is striking. A company built on sustainable development now finds itself at odds with Europe's green policies. Tesla's labor disputes with European unions have been one of the most critical factors in its downfall. The company's refusal to sign a collective bargaining agreement with Swedish workers in 2023 sparked massive strikes across the Nordic region, further escalating tensions. These strikes weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader pattern of resistance against Tesla's corporate policies. Tesla's anti-union stance is viewed by many in Europe as a blatant disregard for workers' rights. In Denmark, Norway, and Finland, unions blockaded Tesla shipments, creating a paralyzed supply chain. These were not just temporary disruptions. They were clear signs that Tesla was not welcome in these markets, at least not in its current form. The cultural divide was wide. In Europe, where labor rights are seen as non-negotiable, Tesla's refusal to adapt to local standards was viewed as a direct attack on European labor culture. While Tesla's reputation and sales plummeted, European competitors were capitalizing on the opportunity. Volkswagen, BMW, and Renault have all seen significant growth in the EV market. But the key to their success isn't just their vehicles, it's their alignment with European values. Unlike Tesla, these companies understand the importance of labor rights, local hiring, and union compliance. They are committed to sustainability, and they understand that European consumers not only want advanced technology, but also a brand that aligns with their values. As Tesla's brand appeal fades, Volkswagen and Renault continue to dominate, further eroding Tesla's market share in the EU. Once the undisputed leader in the EV space, Tesla is now at a crossroads. The company that was once synonymous with innovation and progress has become a polarizing brand. In Germany, 94% of consumers said they had no interest in purchasing a Tesla, an outright rejection of the once beloved brand. For many, Tesla is no longer a symbol of the future, but a brand tarnished by controversy. Musk's political stances, his refusal to comply with labor laws, and his downplaying of climate change have turned many potential customers away. Tesla was built on the foundation of sustainable development. Now it's become a cautionary tale of how corporate ethics and political actions can have far-reaching consequences on a global scale. With Tesla's credibility in freefall and Trump's political moves challenging Europe's territorial sovereignty, US-Europe relations are at a tipping point. Europe is no longer willing to back down, whether it's about Greenland or the future of Tesla. For Tesla, the stakes couldn't be higher. If the company doesn't rebuild its reputation in Europe, it risks losing its place as a leader in the global automotive market. Meanwhile, Trump's approach to diplomacy and trade continues to strain transatlantic relations as Europe pushes back against US unilateralism. What happens next? Will Tesla recover, or has it already lost Europe for good? And will the US shift its strategy to prevent a deeper rift with the EU? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. In March 2025, tensions between the US and Europe escalated further as EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic met with top US officials to head off harmful tariffs that President Trump threatened to impose. These tariffs were part of Trump's broader strategy to tackle non-tariff trade barriers and impose reciprocal duties on major trading partners. The EU's priority was clear: to avoid unjustified tariffs and ensure a fair and balanced trade deal. Despite multiple meetings with top Trump administration officials, Sefcovic made it clear that progress had been slow, with no immediate resolution in sight. The US was prepared to raise tariffs on EU goods, particularly in the automotive sector, which would see a 25% tariff on US truck imports and 10% on EU car imports. This has been a part of Trump's Liberation Day plan, aimed at reclaiming the US economy from what he perceives as unfair global trade practices. As Europe continues to face the looming threat of these tariffs, The EU remains determined to avoid a full-blown trade war. However, this confrontation highlights the increasingly fragile trade relations between the US and Europe. With rising tariffs and economic retaliation on both sides, the fallout from these trade disputes is beginning to affect not only the auto industry but other sectors as well, further straining transatlantic relations. The US's pressure on Greenland also exemplifies its broader strategy of using economic leverage to achieve political objectives, a tactic that has only deepened the rift between the US and Europe. On March 25, 2025, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen criticized the US for its unacceptable pressure regarding Greenland, calling the US actions unilateral and dismissive of Denmark's sovereignty. This followed a controversial visit by US officials to Greenland, which Denmark saw as an attempt to force Greenland's sale to the United States. Frederiksen's response was unequivocal. Greenland is not for sale and will never be sold, emphasizing the sovereign rights of Denmark and Greenland in the face of US interference. This confrontation came on the heels of an already strained political climate between the US and Europe, exacerbated by Trump's aggressive foreign policy and trade tactics. The situation underscores the growing unease in Europe over US dominance in global geopolitics and trade. In response, European leaders have increasingly emphasized national sovereignty and self-determination, signaling a shift towards more independent foreign policy stances within the EU. This is a critical moment that highlights how trade policies and territorial disputes are increasingly intertwined, with economic power plays becoming a tool for diplomatic leverage. These developments also tie into the broader picture of transatlantic trade relations and the economic fallout that both sides are facing. The EU, as a major trading bloc, has voiced concerns over the US administration's approach to tariffs and trade restrictions, especially in critical sectors, such as automobiles and technology. While the US seeks to counteract what it sees as unfair trade practices by imposing tariffs, the European Union continues to argue that such moves would harm both sides by disrupting supply chains and escalating economic tensions. At the core of these disputes is the shift in global power dynamics. The EU's efforts to resist the US's imposition of tariffs are part of a larger trend where Europe is becoming more assertive in defending its interests. This is particularly true as China's rise as an economic power also factors into the equation, with Europe balancing its trade interests between the US, China, and other emerging economies. In light of these challenges, European officials are seeking alternative avenues to maintain economic stability and avoid the potential disruption that a full-scale trade war could bring. The EU's trade policy now emphasizes cooperation and dialogue, working with US officials to prevent long-term damage, while also preparing for possible retaliatory actions. The stakes are high. If the EU and US cannot resolve their trade differences, the impact could be felt across the global economy, especially in industries already grappling with the uncertainty of a post-pandemic world. In the battle between Tesla and Europe, and between Trump and European sovereignty, one thing is clear: the global balance of power is shifting. Tesla, once the face of green innovation, is now struggling to maintain its footing in Europe. Meanwhile, Trump's Greenland ambitions are sparking a geopolitical crisis with Europe. As the US and Europe collide, the world is watching to see how this tension will unfold. Stay tuned, because the biggest changes in international relations and corporate strategy are just beginning. Relations and the economic fallout that both sides are facing. The EU, as a major trading bloc, has voiced concerns over the US administration's approach to tariffs and trade restrictions, especially in critical sectors, such as automobiles and technology. While the US seeks to counteract what it sees as unfair trade practices by imposing tariffs, the European Union continues to argue that such moves would harm both sides by disrupting supply chains and escalating economic tensions. At the core of these disputes is the shift in global power dynamics. The EU's efforts to resist the US's imposition of tariffs are part of a larger trend where Europe is becoming more assertive in defending its interests. This is particularly true as China's rise as an economic power also factors into the equation, with Europe balancing its trade interests between the US, China, and other emerging economies. In light of these challenges, European officials are seeking alternative avenues to maintain economic stability and avoid the potential disruption that a full-scale trade war could bring. The EU's trade policy now emphasizes cooperation and dialogue, working with
President-elect Trump is vowing to impose 100% tariffs on BRICS nations unless they commit to not developing a new currency.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to increase 100% import tariffs on all goods from BRICS member countries if the bloc moves ahead with plans to introduce a new BRICS.
The top story that we're tracking at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned of BRICS member countries from replacing the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency.
In a highly charged statement that shook the international stage, President Donald Trump recently delivered a sharp warning to the BRICS nations. Any attempts to challenge the supremacy of the U.S. dollar would be met with swift and severe repercussions. The message was clear, concise, and carried the weight of an economic powerhouse. The U.S. would not tolerate any encroachment on its dollar's dominance in global trade. Trump's warning came with a bold and unprecedented threat: 100% tariffs on countries that undermine the dollar. His declaration was not only a statement of economic intent, but also a political one. The U.S., through the dominance of its currency, has maintained its global power for decades. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency has afforded the U.S. a unique position of strength, especially when it comes to global trade and finance. It's a tool of leverage, both in trade agreements and in its ability to impose economic sanctions. The question now is whether BRICS, a coalition of emerging economies, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, would back down in the face of such a threat or continue with their growing efforts to reduce reliance on the dollar. Historically, the U.S. has used its control over global financial systems to shape international economics in its favor. However, BRICS nations are increasingly questioning this and looking for ways to decouple from the dollar's dominance. While the U.S.'s message was stern, the reality is that BRICS nations are not easily intimidated. These countries, representing over 40% of the world's population and a significant portion of the global GDP, are pushing forward with their own strategies to reduce reliance on the dollar. Despite Trump's strong stance, this might just be the opening salvo in a battle that will determine the future of global finance. Will the U.S. dollar remain as the bedrock of the international monetary system? Or will emerging powers succeed in reshaping the landscape? While Trump's threats may have raised concerns within the BRICS group, the nations comprising this bloc are showing a determination to assert their financial independence. Over the last few years, BRICS countries have been building strategies to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar, and the warning from Trump has only amplified their commitment to break free from the dollar's dominance. One of the most significant initiatives has been the push for local currency trade. The idea is simple: trade with each other in local currencies instead of relying on the U.S. dollar as a middleman. This move reduces the risk of currency fluctuations tied to the U.S. dollar and opens up opportunities for greater financial autonomy. Take Brazil and China, for instance. These two countries have made major strides in this direction by agreeing to trade directly in their own currencies, the Chinese yuan and the Brazilian real. The shift is highly symbolic. It marks a decisive move away from the dollar-centric financial system. And it's not just Brazil and China. Other BRICS countries, such as India and Russia, are also looking into similar arrangements, paving the way for a future where the U.S. dollar is no longer a necessary intermediary for trade among emerging economies. In addition to local currency trading, BRICS has been pushing for alternative financial systems that bypass the traditional Western-dominated networks like SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. These are bold steps that are more than just economic maneuvers. They are geopolitical moves aimed at asserting independence from the West and reducing the economic and political leverage the United States holds over these nations. The strategy is clear. BRICS nations want to create a financial ecosystem that is not reliant on the U.S. dollar. This not only serves their economic interests, but also acts as a direct challenge to the long-standing U.S. influence over global finance. One of the most powerful moves BRICS has made in its pursuit of financial independence is the massive accumulation of gold. As of 2024, BRICS countries own 6,200 tons of gold, which will represent over 21% of the world's total gold reserves. This is not just about stockpiling precious metals. It's a carefully crafted strategy to protect these countries from financial instability and economic sanctions, which have been a tool of leverage for the U.S. in the past. Gold has long been seen as a safe haven asset. In times of economic uncertainty, gold tends to hold its value, unlike paper currencies that can fluctuate wildly. For BRICS nations, the idea behind accumulating vast amounts of gold is simple. They want to shield themselves from the volatility and uncertainty that can come from being tied to the US dollar, and by extension, the global financial system dominated by Western powers. In a world where the US dollar plays such a pivotal role in global trade, gold provides BRICS countries with an alternative asset that is less vulnerable to US sanctions or political decisions. As the US and other Western nations continue to wield the power of the dollar for geopolitical gain, BRICS is looking to create an alternative store of value that is insulated from these pressures. The gold accumulation strategy reflects a long-term vision for a financially independent future. It's a signal to the world. BRICS isn't just talking about change, they are preparing for it. Their gold reserves will act as a financial buffer, ensuring that these nations are prepared for any financial crisis, including the fallout that might come from challenging the dollar's dominance. Let's talk about one of the most game-changing developments in the BRICS strategy, the launch of BRICS Pay. This new cross-border payment platform uses blockchain technology to enable BRICS nations to transact directly in their local currencies, bypassing traditional Western financial systems. This is a direct challenge to SWIFT, the international financial messaging system that has been dominated by the US and European powers for decades. BRICS Pay is more than just a payment system. It represents a revolutionary shift in how these nations are choosing to conduct financial transactions. One of the key advantages of this platform is that it eliminates the need for currency conversion fees and significantly reduces transaction costs. This is especially important for countries like Brazil, Russia, and China, who are working to reduce their exposure to the US dollar. SWIFT has long been the backbone of global financial transactions, but it has also been a tool of US influence. The US has used its dominance over SWIFT to impose sanctions on countries like Iran and Russia, effectively cutting them off from the global financial system. BRICS Pay aims to bypass this system entirely, offering an alternative that is controlled by BRICS countries themselves. With BRICS Pay, these nations are not only seeking to reduce the cost of cross-border transactions, they are also positioning themselves as a serious challenger to the Western financial infrastructure. This is a critical step in the long-term goal of creating a more independent, multipolar global financial system. The success of BRICS Pay will be a signal that the US-dominated financial architecture is no longer the only game in town. For BRICS countries, this move is about more than just economics. It's about political and financial sovereignty. By creating a payment system that bypasses US-controlled infrastructure, BRICS is actively working to build an economic order that is more balanced and fair, especially for emerging economies that have long felt sidelined by Western financial institutions. For all the bold moves that BRICS nations are making, it's important to recognize that the US dollar is still deeply embedded in the global financial system. The dollar is the world's reserve currency, used in approximately 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, and the dominant currency in international trade, particularly in energy markets. It's no exaggeration to say that the US dollar is the backbone of global finance, deeply woven into financial networks, trade agreements, and global institutions. The US dollar's dominance is also reinforced by its role in global financial markets. The dollar is used in the majority of foreign exchange transactions, settles trade between countries, and serves as the standard for commodities like oil, gold, and other natural resources. This provides the United States with unparalleled economic leverage, especially in times of global crisis or geopolitical tension. But BRICS's push for local currency trade, their gold accumulation strategy, and the creation of alternatives like BRICS Pay are shaking the foundations of this system. The growing efforts of BRICS to reduce their reliance on the US dollar represent a direct challenge to the global financial system that has been dominated by the West for decades. That said, the US dollar remains dominant for now, but the tension between the US and BRICS is building. BRICS nations are not only seeking greater financial independence, they are working to reshape the global financial system, creating an alternative path that could eventually erode the dollar's supremacy. As we've seen with other global shifts throughout history, the future may hold significant changes that could challenge the dollar's place at the top. This battle is far from over. The US dollar's dominance might not disappear overnight, but BRICS is making it clear that they are serious contenders for a larger role in the global financial system. Whether the US can hold on to its dominant position, or if BRICS's efforts will lead to a fundamental shift in global finance remains to be seen, but the stakes could not be higher. As the global financial landscape evolves, the role of Canada has become increasingly pivotal, especially in the context of Trump's protectionist policies and BRICS's drive for financial independence. A key figure stepping into the political arena to address these challenges is Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada. Carney, known for his deep understanding of global financial systems, is now poised to take on Donald Trump's aggressive trade policies from the Canadian political front. Carney's entry into politics has been fueled by his concern over the economic ramifications of Trump's trade wars and protectionist measures. Trump's tariffs on Canadian products, such as steel, aluminum, and wine, have significantly impacted Canada's economy, putting major industries at risk. Trump's America First strategy has primarily centered on unilateral tariffs and trade restrictions, which Carney believes are harmful not only to the US, but to its closest allies, particularly Canada. Canada, which shares one of the largest trade relationships with the US, has been increasingly vulnerable to the fallout of Trump's protectionism. The most recent threat, a 200% tariff on Canadian wine imports, has led to growing concerns over the future of the US-Canada trade relationship. This is where Carney has become more vocal, positioning himself to address these challenges head-on. Carney's stance on global trade cooperation opposes the US's isolationist approach. While Trump's policies are based on the principle of protecting American jobs and industries, Carney advocates for a collaborative economic strategy that strengthens ties with both the US and the rest of the world. This vision includes reducing trade barriers and promoting fairer, mutually beneficial trade agreements. Carney argues that Canada's future economic prosperity relies on multilateralism, not the protectionist policies Trump has championed. In his pursuit to influence Canada's economic future, Carney is preparing to challenge the economic policies of the current US administration. As of March 2025, Carney is expected to officially call for elections in Canada, aiming to gain a mandate to address Trump's tariff threats and economic policies that have long been a source of tension between the two nations. In a recent statement, Carney made it clear that his political platform would focus heavily on Canadian economic autonomy in the face of US policies that could potentially harm Canada's domestic industries. He plans to advocate for more diversified trade partnerships, reducing Canada's over-reliance on the US, and strengthening relationships with BRICS nations, the European Union, and other emerging markets. This approach mirrors the broader BRICS strategy of moving away from US dollar dependency and expanding global trade networks without being dominated by the US. The economic dispute with the US, especially around tariffs, has spurred Canada to reevaluate its economic alliances. While Trump's tariffs have caused a dent in certain sectors, Canada is exploring ways to strengthen its economic sovereignty and financial autonomy, reducing the risks associated with relying too heavily on the US. Carney's political rise is partly a response to the growing tension over Trump's trade policies, which threaten to harm key industries and damage Canada's economic standing in the world. Carney's message is clear: Canada must seek alternative economic pathways. While the US remains a critical trade partner, Carney's focus is on ensuring that Canada is not just a bystander in the economic and geopolitical decisions being made by the US. Instead, he advocates for policies that promote economic stability through diversification of trade relationships and the development of independent financial systems, a strategy similar to what BRICS is pursuing on a global scale. Carney is also emphasizing the importance of investing in Canadian industries that will ensure the country's long-term financial security, especially as global markets continue to shift away from US-dominated financial systems. If elected, Carney's leadership could position Canada as a neutral but influential player in the changing dynamics of global trade, aligning with emerging powers while also maintaining strong ties with traditional Western allies. As the global financial landscape continues to shift, the tension between established Western powers and emerging economies will only intensify. BRICS countries have made it clear that they will no longer accept the dollar's unchallenged reign, and with their ambitious financial plans, they are pushing the world toward a multipolar financial order. Meanwhile, President Trump's protectionist stance threatens to ignite further trade wars, not only with Canada but also with other global powers. Mark Carney, with his focus on financial cooperation, is emerging as a potential leader who could help steer Canada, and by extension, the world, through these turbulent times. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the global financial system is at a crossroads, and the next few years will determine whether the US dollar can retain its dominant position or whether emerging economies, aided by voices like Carney's, will succeed in reshaping the world's economic order. The challenge ahead is not just about tariffs and trade wars. It's about the balance of power, politically, economically, and financially. How this will unfold remains to be seen, but the world is watching closely.
But China is a different story. A 10% tariff on Chinese imports went into effect at midnight. China retaliated immediately, a 15% tax on U.S. coal, 10% on U.S. crude oil, and large displacement cars.
Yes, again, going exactly by the playbook like clockwork. At 1 p.m., seconds after that, China released its slew of countermeasures, pretty extensive this time round compared to the previous round in February. They're targeting up to 15% tariffs on a list of U.S. goods.
In just 6 months, Tesla's market capitalization plummeted by more than 50%. A staggering $800 billion in lost value. This isn't just a loss for an electric car company. This is a loss on the scale of any major corporation, making it a monumental economic event. For years, Tesla was the shining example of success in the electric vehicle, EV sector, and the market treated it as one of the greatest success stories of the 21st century. Elon Musk's brainchild, Tesla, was once unstoppable, a leader in green technology and innovation. But in 2024, Tesla has faced a monumental crisis that has shaken not only investors, but the entire global automotive industry. Let's break it down. Over a span of a few days, Tesla's stock tumbled by 15% in a single day, followed by another 3% drop after hours. It's safe to say that Tesla's once unshakable position has crumbled, and its investors are now left wondering what went wrong. But what caused this sudden downfall? At the core of Tesla's problems are rising production costs, declining demand, and increasing competition. To understand why Tesla is in turmoil, we must first look at its relationship with China, the world's largest EV market. Tesla's fortunes in China were once crucial to its success, but now, China's shifting policies are increasingly harming Tesla's position. As part of a retaliatory move against US tariffs, China has raised the import tax on Tesla's products from 15% to 25% on its high-end models, including the Model S and Model X. These tax increases may not seem like much at first glance, but for a company like Tesla that imports parts from the US and Europe, these additional costs are significant. For consumers, the higher import taxes make Tesla cars more expensive and less accessible in the Chinese market, which has long been one of Tesla's most profitable regions. What's more concerning is that Chinese manufacturers, such as BYD and NIO, are rapidly gaining ground in the EV market. By offering comparable technology at significantly lower prices, these brands are making it harder for Tesla to retain its market share. For instance, BYD's electric vehicles cost about $30,000, while a Tesla Model 3 is priced at around $43,000. For the average Chinese consumer, this price difference is hard to overlook. In 2023, BYD sold over 2.7 million vehicles, capturing 35% of the Chinese EV market, while Tesla's sales in China plummeted to only 600,000 vehicles. This shift in consumer preference is a clear signal. Domestic options are increasingly favored over foreign imports. Tesla is not just facing competition in China, but its share in the US market has also been declining. In 2020, Tesla held 79% of the electric vehicle market in the US, but by 2023, that number had dropped to 62.4%, a sharp decline. Elon Musk's controversial political views and statements have played a role in eroding Tesla's customer loyalty, especially among more politically neutral buyers. As a result, Tesla's image as the pioneer of innovation is starting to fade, and competitors are slowly but steadily claiming the market Tesla once dominated. The company's financial reports also paint a grim picture. With production costs increasing and demand shrinking, Tesla faces the hard truth. It may no longer be the cash cow investors once believed it to be. As it stands, Tesla's future is uncertain, and unless it adjusts its pricing strategy and improves its technology, it may very well lose its position as a leader in the electric vehicle sector. Now, let's focus on China, the world's second-largest economy and the primary architect behind the shift away from US economic dominance. Over the past few years, China has been strategically positioning itself to challenge America's grip on the global financial system. While Tesla struggles, China's economy has been growing stronger and more assertive on the world stage, thanks to a series of bold and calculated moves. One of the major moves was China's response to the US trade tariffs. In 2024, the US imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, targeting a wide array of products. China's retaliation was swift and strategic. China imposed a 15% tariff on US coal and crude oil, as well as a 10% tax on large displacement cars and pickup trucks, many of which are made by American manufacturers, such as Ford and General Motors. But the real damage to Tesla came in the form of the increased import taxes on electric vehicles, EVs. China raised its tax on foreign electric cars from 15% to 25%. This meant that the cost of Tesla's high-end models, such as the Model S and Model X, became significantly more expensive for Chinese consumers. At a time when China is investing heavily in its own EV market, this shift is critical. BYD and NIO, two Chinese automakers, are flooding the market with cheaper, more accessible EVs that rival Tesla's offerings in terms of technology and features. In 2023, BYD sold 2.7 million vehicles, which represents a 35% share of the Chinese EV market. On the other hand, Tesla's sales in China dropped drastically to just 600,000 vehicles, a shocking decrease that highlights the growing preference for local manufacturers over foreign imports. But China's tariffs and taxes are just one part of the equation. China has also been actively working to reduce its dependence on the US dollar, signaling a broader strategy to reshape the global financial system. As part of its efforts to create an economic environment less reliant on American financial power, China has been actively building its gold reserves, reducing its US Treasury bond holdings, and creating a financial ecosystem where it can bypass the dollar and make transactions in yuan or gold. China's strategy is clear: reduce reliance on Western financial systems, challenge the dominance of the US dollar, and ensure that its economy is not vulnerable to future US sanctions or economic pressures. As the BRICS nations, including Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, align themselves with China's strategy, the foundation of the global economic order is shifting. In early 2025, former President Donald Trump issued an unprecedented warning to the BRICS nations. If they continue to bypass the US dollar in international transactions, they will face a 100% tariff on their goods. This threat reflects Trump's desperate attempt to preserve the dominance of the US dollar, which has been the cornerstone of the American financial system for decades. But his words are not just empty rhetoric. They highlight the growing concerns over the future of the dollar and its role as the world's reserve currency. For years, the US dollar has been the global reserve currency, meaning most international trade is conducted in dollars. This arrangement has allowed the US to borrow money easily and maintain control over international financial systems. But now China and the BRICS nations are taking steps to wean themselves off the dollar and reduce their reliance on it. China has been particularly aggressive in this effort. As we've already discussed, China has reduced its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds and has been accumulating gold at an alarming rate. In 2024, China added 250 tons of gold to its reserves, signaling a shift away from U.S. dollar-backed assets. This is a bold move by China, which historically has been one of the largest buyers of U.S. debt. The problem for the U.S. is that as countries like China, Russia, and other BRICS members increase their gold reserves and seek to trade in their own currencies, the U.S. dollar's dominance is no longer guaranteed. If the U.S. loses its position as the world's reserve currency, it could face higher borrowing costs, reduced economic influence, and a loss of financial power in international markets. This shift is not just a theoretical scenario, it's happening right now. And as BRICS nations push forward with plans to bypass the US dollar, it remains to be seen whether Trump's threats can prevent this seismic shift in global financial power. Now let's explore one of the most intriguing questions of all. Can gold replace the US dollar as the dominant currency in global trade? For centuries, gold has been the ultimate store of value. In a world where the US dollar's dominance is increasingly being questioned, could gold make a comeback as the primary asset used for international transactions? As we've already seen, China has been steadily increasing its gold reserves. In 2024, China added 250 tons of gold to its stockpile, a strategic move designed to reduce the country's reliance on the US dollar and strengthen its position in the global economy. But China isn't the only player in this game. Other BRICS nations, such as Russia, Brazil, and India, have also been building their gold reserves, signaling a shift away from the dollar and a potential future where gold becomes the new standard for global trade. Why gold? Unlike fiat currencies, which can be printed at will, gold has inherent value and is seen as a safe haven during times of financial instability. As countries like China and Russia diversify their reserves, they are reducing their exposure to US dollar fluctuations and financial sanctions. This could lead to a future where gold-backed currencies replace the US dollar in international trade. If gold does replace the dollar as the global reserve currency, the implications for the US economy would be profound. America's borrowing power would be severely restricted, and its ability to control global trade would diminish. Countries like China and Russia are already leading the charge in creating a new global financial system, one that is less reliant on the US dollar and more focused on tangible assets like gold. The shift towards gold isn't just a reaction to US policies. It's a long-term strategy to protect these countries from the volatility of the global financial system. And as BRICS nations continue to accumulate gold, we may be on the cusp of a new era in global finance, one where the US dollar no longer reigns supreme. As the battle for global financial dominance rages on, the US is increasingly engaging in economic warfare with its own allies and adversaries. The latest developments reflect how America's trade policies, aimed at protecting national interests, are having unintended consequences, creating ripples across industries that are heavily dependent on international trade. One such case involves the Trump administration's plan to impose heavy fees on China-linked vessels. This proposal is intended to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry by penalizing foreign-built Chinese vessels. The idea is to encourage American shipbuilding, which has seen a sharp decline in recent years. However, this initiative, while seemingly strategic, threatens to hurt key sectors in the U.S. maritime industry and other essential industries that depend on international shipping. The Trump administration's proposal would impose fees up to $3 million per U.S. port call for Chinese ships. While aimed at reducing China's dominance in global shipping and boosting domestic shipbuilding, it has created tension within the U.S. maritime industry. Industry executives argue that these fees would lead to higher costs for U.S.-owned shipping companies and disrupt the operations of critical U.S. sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and mining, which rely heavily on efficient shipping routes to deliver goods domestically and internationally. The proposed fees are already creating uncertainty for U.S. exporters, with some industries struggling to secure shipping slots beyond May 2025. Agricultural exporters, in particular, are finding it difficult to book cargo space, and coal producers are facing similar challenges. Maritime and agricultural industries warn that these fees could lead to a reduction in exports, loss of jobs, and higher prices for American consumers. A study conducted by industry groups predicts that the U.S. could see a 12% drop in exports, reducing the GDP by 0.25%. While the U.S. aims to bolster its own shipbuilding capacity, the reality is that many domestic companies, such as Seaboard Marine, rely on China-built vessels. Penalizing these vessels could inadvertently harm the very businesses that would drive demand for U.S.-built ships in the future. The U.S. maritime industry, along with various sectors relying on international trade, is facing a double-edged sword. The push for national production and protectionism comes at the cost of immediate economic disruption. If this proposal moves forward, it could disrupt U.S. market access, raise costs, and cause broader economic instability, all in the name of countering China's growing commercial and military influence. As the world's economic superpower, the United States has always wielded trade restrictions as a weapon. Recently, the U.S. has expanded its export blacklist, targeting dozens of Chinese entities involved in sectors such as technology, defense, and sensitive infrastructure. These entities have been added to the U.S. export restriction list, making it difficult for American companies to sell crucial technology or products to these Chinese firms. On March 25, 2025, the U.S. added multiple Chinese entities to its export restriction list, which severely limits the ability of U.S. companies to conduct business with these firms. This is part of a broader strategy to restrict China's access to American technology and intelligence. The expansion of these restrictions has further strained the U.S.-China relations. The U.S. government justifies these moves as a national security measure, citing concerns over intellectual property theft and the militarization of Chinese tech firms. However, these actions have major implications for U.S. businesses that rely on Chinese partnerships. By cutting off access to U.S. technology, these restrictions are impacting the global supply chain, especially in industries such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and telecommunications. U.S. companies may find themselves at a disadvantage, unable to access Chinese markets or suppliers that are critical to their operations. Companies like Intel, Qualcomm, and Boeing are already feeling the pinch as these restrictions are disrupting their supply chains and limiting their ability to compete globally. The U.S. government's decision to blacklist these entities is not without significant economic consequences. The export restrictions are just the latest chapter in the ongoing economic battle between the U.S. and China. While the U.S. government claims that these measures are necessary to safeguard national security, they are likely to have severe ramifications for U.S. tech giants and industries that depend on access to Chinese manufacturing and supply chains. The world is changing, and so is the balance of economic power. Will the U.S. dollar remain the dominant force, or will China and its allies succeed in building a new financial order? As we continue to watch this unfolding drama, the global economy could be on the verge of a historic transformation. Stay tuned, as the future of finance is being written today.
President Trump is vowing to buy a Tesla after the company's stock plunged.
Welcome back. Tesla shares are on track for another down week, losing about 6% since Monday. That could extend its record losing streak to 9 straight weeks, dating right back to the inauguration. And that, plus protests at dealerships around the country, is even getting the White House.
Tesla, once hailed as a symbol of technological innovation and environmental progress, is now facing an existential crisis that has rattled not only its investors, but also the entire electric vehicle industry. In just a matter of months, the company's stock has experienced a dramatic 53% drop, plummeting from an astronomical $1.54 trillion to a mere $635 billion. This collapse signals a severe shift in investor sentiment, and it's becoming impossible to ignore that Tesla, once seen as the future of the auto industry, is now teetering on the brink of a major setback. What happened? Why is this company, which was celebrated for leading the charge in electric vehicles, now struggling to maintain its ground? The roots of Tesla's fall are intertwined with a complex mix of external pressures and internal challenges. The tariffs imposed by the Trump administration are a major factor contributing to the company's declining fortunes. Tesla relies on a global supply chain to manufacture its electric vehicles, sourcing crucial parts from Europe, China, and other regions. The escalating tariffs on these imports have increased production costs significantly, forcing Tesla to raise the prices of its vehicles. For many consumers already grappling with inflation and rising costs, a more expensive electric car becomes an unappealing option. This is especially true for the Model 3 and Model Y, two of Tesla's most affordable and popular offerings. The price hikes, combined with the reduced purchasing power of American families, have put the company in a difficult position. But tariffs are only part of the story. Tesla is also facing growing competition from both traditional automakers and new entrants into the electric vehicle market. Companies like Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis are all heavily investing in electric vehicles and rapidly expanding their product lines. Volkswagen, for example, has boldly announced plans to become the largest electric vehicle maker in the world, which is a direct challenge to Tesla's dominance. In Europe, Tesla has already seen a sharp decline in market share as local brands offer more competitive pricing and better after-sales service. With more and more consumers opting for alternatives that offer similar or even superior features, Tesla's once unshakable grip on the EV market is loosening. The competition doesn't stop there. In China, Tesla faces the added challenge of rising nationalist sentiments and growing demand for homegrown electric vehicles like BYD and NIO, which are offering electric cars at significantly lower prices. This new wave of competition threatens Tesla's position, especially as it navigates the political and economic tensions of the trade war between the US and China. In summary, Tesla's decline is not just about external market forces, but also its own inability to adapt quickly enough to a rapidly changing environment. The company's failure to diversify its customer base and address pricing pressures leaves it vulnerable in the face of fierce competition. If these challenges continue unabated, Tesla's dominance in the electric vehicle space may very well become a thing of the past. While Tesla's troubles are significant, they're just the tip of the iceberg. The larger picture is that the US economy is facing an unprecedented crisis, one that is shaking the very foundations of the nation's economic structure. Over the past few years, the United States has been hit with soaring inflation, rising consumer costs, and an economy that seems increasingly out of control. For the average American family, the dream of financial security feels more like an unattainable fantasy. Prices for gasoline, groceries, and basic household goods have skyrocketed, leaving families struggling to make ends meet. Despite Trump's promises to bring down inflation, his policies appear to be having the opposite effect. The stock market has taken a massive hit, and the value of the US dollar has declined sharply, further exacerbating the economic malaise. On March 14, 2025, the US stock market lost $4 trillion in a single day. This wasn't just a minor setback. It was a massive financial collapse, with investors fleeing the market and shifting their capital into US Treasury bonds in search of safety. The impact was felt immediately, with major industries like automotive, construction, and consumer goods reeling from the fallout. The core of this crisis lies in Trump's trade policies, which have exacerbated inflation by raising tariffs on goods imported from key trading partners like China, Canada, and Mexico. While the administration claims these tariffs are designed to protect American industries and curb illegal goods, the reality is that they are having the opposite effect. These tariffs have driven up the cost of raw materials and finished goods, pushing prices higher and widening the wealth gap between the rich and the working class. Trump has also made promises about reviving American manufacturing and boosting economic growth, but the evidence suggests that these goals are largely unfulfilled. The automotive industry, in particular, has suffered greatly. Ford and General Motors, two of America's most iconic manufacturers, are facing massive financial losses, with Ford projecting $5.5 billion in losses and GM forecasting $6 billion in losses over the next year. As these companies struggle to adjust to the new economic realities, they're forced to lay off workers, which only deepens the pain felt by American families. And it's not just the corporate sector that's struggling. Ordinary Americans are facing a financial nightmare. Unemployment is rising, healthcare costs are escalating, and wages remain stagnant. This is a perfect storm of economic mismanagement, and its consequences are devastating for those who can least afford it. But the economic turmoil isn't just confined to the United States. The international fallout from Trump's trade wars is already becoming painfully apparent. Countries like Canada and China are increasingly growing wary of the U.S.'s economic policies, and these tensions are leading to serious consequences for both sides. Take Canada, for instance. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made it clear that Canada will not sit idly by as the U.S. imposes unilateral tariffs on its goods. In fact, in direct response to the 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, Canada has imposed retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods. This represents the strongest trade response Canada has ever made against the U.S. The impact of these tariffs is already being felt. In Ontario, a key province in the Canadian economy, the government has slapped a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S., which could affect over 1.5 million homes in states like New York and Minnesota. If these tariffs remain in place, Canada has warned that it could take further steps, including a complete power cutoff to the U.S. This is just the beginning. Other Canadian provinces, including Nova Scotia, have also retaliated by blocking U.S. trade. Nova Scotia has even gone so far as to remove American liquor from stores and ban U.S. companies from bidding on government contracts. This is a coordinated effort to hit back at the U.S. for its economic aggression. But Canada isn't the only country feeling the heat. China, which has been at the center of Trump's trade war, is also looking for ways to respond to U.S. tariffs. The ongoing tensions between the two largest economies in the world have raised fears of an all-out trade war that could have devastating effects on global markets. The bottom line is clear. Trump's aggressive trade policies are not only alienating key allies, but also pushing the U.S. toward an economic isolation that could have long-term consequences for its standing in the global marketplace. Perhaps the most concerning consequence of this crisis is the way it is affecting the very people who supported President Trump's policies. The working-class Americans, particularly those in rural communities, are feeling the pain of these economic decisions more than anyone else. In the past, Trump promised to revive American manufacturing, bring jobs back to the U.S., and end the era of outsourcing. But the reality has been much different. His trade wars have led to job losses, increased costs, and a sharp decline in local economies. Many of Trump's most loyal voters, from farmers to veterans, are now grappling with the consequences of his policies. They're facing rising costs, losing healthcare benefits, and watching their communities fall apart. The hard truth is that many of Trump's supporters are no longer benefiting from his promises of economic prosperity. In fact, they are now bearing the brunt of these reckless economic policies. For example, the agriculture industry has been decimated by retaliatory tariffs from countries like China and Canada. Farmers who once relied on exports to sustain their livelihoods are now struggling to keep their businesses afloat. In addition, the energy sector is facing rising costs as tariffs on energy imports increase. Many small businesses are closing their doors as consumer spending plummets. The very people who once believed in Trump's vision of economic revival are now seeing their dreams of a better life slip further away. As the economic situation worsens, one big question looms over the future. Will the U.S. economy collapse? The combination of rising tariffs, market instability, and increasing global tensions has left the U.S. vulnerable to a full-blown recession. The stock market collapse in March 2025 was a wake-up call, a clear indication that the economic foundations of the country are crumbling. The situation is only exacerbated by the trade war with key allies and adversaries. Canada's retaliation, along with the ongoing tensions with China, has sparked fears of a global economic meltdown. If these trade wars continue, the ripple effects could lead to widespread market instability and deep recession, both in the U.S. and worldwide. President Trump's economic strategies, if left unchecked, could lead to permanent damage with rising inflation, job losses, and reduced consumer spending, suggest that we are on the brink of something much bigger than a simple economic downturn. As the world watches, the question remains, will the U.S. adjust its course before it's too late? Only time will tell, but the stakes are higher than ever. Tesla, once considered the shining beacon of the future of transportation, is now grappling with not just financial instability, but a growing public backlash. The company's recent struggles have been compounded by protests against its CEO, Elon Musk, and his controversial leadership decisions, both in business and politics. These protests are not just happening in the U.S., but are beginning to resonate internationally, further escalating the tensions surrounding the brand. On March 22, 2025, a group of approximately 100 protesters gathered outside a Tesla dealership in Washington, D.C., to voice their frustrations with Musk's leadership. The protests were fueled by his role in overseeing the downsizing of the federal workforce under the Trump administration.